Today on CityLine, he's one of the most scholarly and influential voices in the social justice movement. And today, Dr. Glaude Jr. is our special guest. Good afternoon, I'm Karen Holmes Ward, and welcome to CityLine. This afternoon, we'll be in conversation with Dr. Glaude Jr. He is the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, where he is also the chair of the Center for African American Studies and the chair of the Department of African American Studies. Dr. Glaude is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Welcome, Dr. Glaude. How are you this afternoon?
It is my pleasure. It's a delight to be with you.
Indeed. So your newest book takes a look at the life and works of the great American writer and activist James Baldwin. So what drew you to write about him?
Well, I've been reading Baldwin for about 30 years, and I knew that he had to grapple with at a certain moment in his life the sense that the country had turned its back on any real effort, genuine effort to be a multiracial democracy. And this particularly was the case after the assassination of Dr. King in 1968. And so what I found in my own moment, where I was grappling with despair and disillusionment, trying to hold it at arm's length, given that the nation had elected Donald Trump, that I needed to find resources in order to speak to our moment, in order to speak to our disillusionment. So I turned to Jimmy. I turned to what he called the ruins of his work and found resources to imagine, as I put it, beginning again.
Now, you say, though, that at first you resisted reading Baldwin.
Yeah, in graduate school, yeah, for sure. Part of the reason why I resisted was in twofold, right? One is that in seminars, when I read Baldwin with my white colleagues, I had to navigate and negotiate flushed faces, red cheeks, the sense that his truth-telling made people uncomfortable. He left the ground scorched in some ways. And so I didn't really have the patience at the time, nor the philosophical tools to deal with what Baldwin was putting forward. And then there was this other side. Baldwin is an exacting companion. He believes in the Socratic dictum that the unexamined life isn't worth living. So to read him, he forces you back onto yourself. And I wasn't mature enough to deal with my own pain, my own wounds, the fact that I'm still a vulnerable little boy grappling with this father who still to this day is an overwhelming influence in my life. So I had to grow up a bit before I could read him a little bit more seriously.
So this past year, in May of 2020, George Floyd killed in Minneapolis. Begin Again came out a month later and immediately hit the bestseller list. And as the summer unfolded with the Black Lives Matter protests, the book became even more widely read. Why do you think the book resonated so deeply?
I don't know. Well, I think grace, let's just be clear in that sense. But I think there's something about what I was trying to do to kind of lay bare the contradictions at the heart of the country that in some ways set the stage for George Floyd's murder, to talk about the lie, to talk about the ways in which Americans are invested in this idea that white people matter more than others, and how that idea, that belief evidences itself in our social arrangements, our political and economic lives, and how it evidences itself in the way in which our communities are policed. So I wrote the book before George Floyd's murder, and there were these moments in the midst of the protest where people were grappling with American history, public history, right? Taking down Confederate monuments. And I had written about that in some ways. And in some ways, it's because Baldwin's words were so prophetic. He is perhaps the most insightful critic we have of the vexing question of race and democracy. So my effort to walk with him spoke to our moment in a way that I could not have imagined when I sat down to write the book.
Throughout the program, we're going to pull up some quotes from Baldwin. This first one: ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. And as you say, Baldwin's words seem so prophetic now as we reflect on the tragic and very contentious events of the past year and even the past few weeks.
Right. So, I mean, look, I mean, power can easily exploit our fears, can exploit what we do not know. And we know this. I mean, those of us who have read Machiavelli, those who read de Tocqueville, we know that fear has been a critical kind of political emotion that has been used for all sorts of horrible things. So when you don't know, when there is a kind of cultivation of ignorance, when there's a kind of willful ignorance, allied with this effort to how can I put it, to control the reins of power in the name of a view of the world that denies certain people dignity and standing, in the name of a view of a world that seeks kind of the extraction of resources, greed and selfishness, right? It can produce, unadulterated evil. Mm. And Baldwin understood that. Mm. And he was a prophetic witness to it in some ways.
Your view of what's going on in Washington after the Capitol uprising and now with the current hearings?
I think this is the logical extension of the backlash to the mid-20th century Black freedom struggle. This was a mostly white mob revolting in the name of this idea that America must remain a white nation in the vein of old Europe. It was a mostly white mob of men and women who asserted that only white voters matter, that they have a different quality of citizenship than others. This was the latest revolt of the silent majority, of the so-called forgotten American, in the face of demographic shifts that have left them fearful that the world that they believe is theirs is dying. And it's in some ways, Karen, the latest example of the contradiction that has threatened this democracy since its birth. Indeed. It is the serpent wrapped around the legs of the table upon which the Declaration of Independence was signed. That serpent of slavery has always threatened to swallow the experiment whole, and this is just the latest example. Sorry about that.
No. We were going to bring another quote from Baldwin. He says, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." And that, in fact, might capture the duplicity and the hypocrisy that you are just referencing, that Black and brown Americans might see when they view society and how the Capitol riots was handled.
Absolutely. And even at another level, what Baldwin is trying to do in that moment is challenge this idea that America is an idea, that our ideals matter, right? And of course, the ideals of democracy American democracy are important. And, Gunnar Myrdal talks about, right, the American dilemma, the contradiction between our ideals and practices. But what Baldwin is saying there, it's a biblical reference. We know ye by ye fruits, not by what you say, but by what you do. And if we judge your ideals by your practices, we actually see what you truly believe.
Now, you argue in the book that America has had 2 failed opportunities to begin again. What were they? And do you think we'll have another opportunity to begin again?
Well, I talk about 2 moments. One, of course, is the second Reconstruction, the Civil War and radical Reconstruction, what historians describe as the second founding. And here, if you read Douglas Egerton's book and David Blight, you see this extraordinary effort, Eric Foner, W.B. Du Bois, this extraordinary effort on the part of the nation to actually create a genuinely multiracial democracy. But you get the work of the Redeemers, those Southern elites who tried to seize power and reassert white supremacy as they responded to radical Reconstruction with what? Jim Crow laws in the South, convict leasing, the ideology of Anglo-Saxonism that led that framed our imperial ambitions across the world. At the very moment in which Jim Crow was consolidating in the South, we were annexing millions of Black and brown people in the Philippines and Guam and the like, right? So at the moment in which we imagine ourselves differently, we double down on our ugliness, and that ugliness, right, swallowed whole this effort to imagine ourselves differently. And then the mid-20th century, with the Black freedom struggle of the mid-20th century, You think about what was the response to King's movement? What was the response to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68? What was the response to the murder of Dr. King in 68, the election of Richard Nixon? Twice. Calls for law and order, right? The tax revolt in California, which led to the shredding of the social safety net, a wholesale attack on the Great Society, on the New Deal, the Hard Hat Rebellion, and then, of course, by 1980, the election of Ronald Reagan to undo it all. At the very moment in which we imagine ourselves differently, we double down on our ugliness and arrest the opportunity for America to be otherwise. Those are the two moments that I mentioned in the book. And of course, 2008 comes to mind with the election of Barack Obama. And what did we get in response? We got the vitriol of the Tea Party. We got the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. We got voter suppression. And then we got Donald Trump. At the very moment in which we think we were turning a corner, we double down on the ugliness, because every time a new America is about to be born, it seems that the umbilical cord of white supremacy is wrapped around the new baby's neck and chokes the life out of it.
Professor Eddie Glaude is going to be with us for the entire half hour. We'll continue our conversation about James Baldwin and get more of Professor Glaude's views on contradictions he sees in American history. Stay with us.